Welcome to Study Session 8, Database Systems 1. Introduction. In this study session, we will learn another important concept of computer systems, database systems. Databases are an important part of computer systems for storing persistent data. We will study the bedrock of databases, the data model, which is made up of entities and their relationships with one another. We will also study database management, which reveals how special database software, called Database Management System (DBMS), manages the data stored in databases. We will also review the database language, divided into data manipulation and definition languages. Learning outcomes. At the end of this study session, you should be able to define database systems, explain the information model, explain the entities and relationships, explain database management and database languages. Introduction to databases. We live in an information age. By this, we mean that, first, we accept the universal fact that information is required in practically all aspects of human enterprise. The term enterprise is used broadly here to mean any organization of activities to achieve a stated purpose, including socio-economic activities. Second, we recognize further the importance of efficiently providing timely relevant information to an enterprise and of the importance of the proper use of technology to achieve that. Finally, we recognize that the unparalleled development in the technology to handle information has and will continue to change the way we work and live. That is, not only does the technology support existing enterprises, but it changes them and makes possible new enterprises that would not have otherwise been viable. The impact is perhaps most visible in business enterprises, where there are strong elements of competition. This is especially so as businesses become more globalized. The ability to coordinate activities, for example, across national borders and time zones clearly depends on the timeliness and quality of information made available. More important, perhaps, strategic decisions made by top management in response to perceived opportunities or threats will decide the future viability of an enterprise, one way or the other. In other words, in order to manage a business or any enterprise, future developments must be properly estimated. Information is a vital ingredient in this regard. Information must therefore be collected and analyzed in order to make decisions. It is here that the proper use of technology will prove to be crucial to an enterprise. Up-to-date management techniques should include computers, since they are very powerful tools for processing large quantities of information. Collecting and analyzing information using computers is facilitated by current database technology, a relatively mature technology. Information stored in computer memory is called data. In current computer systems, such data can persistently reside on a number of memory devices, most common of which are floppy disk, CD-ROMs, and hard disk. Data that we store and manipulate using computers are meaningful only to the extent that they are associated with some real-world object in a given context. Take, for example, the number 23. This is a piece of data, but by itself a meaningless quantity. If it was associated with, say, a person and interpreted to denote the person's age in years, then it begins to be more meaningful. Or if it was associated with, say, an organization that sells electronic products and interpreted to mean the number of television sets sold in a given month, then again it becomes more meaningful. Notice that in both preceding examples, other pieces of data had to be brought into context. A person's age, a shop, television set, a given month, and so on. If the data is a collection of related facts about some enterprise, for example, a business, an organization, an activity, and so on, then it is called a database. The data stored need not include every conceivable piece of fact about that enterprise. Usually, only facts relevant to some area of enterprise are captured and organized, typically to provide information to support decision making at various levels, operational, management. Such a constrained area of focus is also often referred to as a problem domain or domain of interest, as is typical of databases. In this sense, a database is an information model of some problem domain, of some real-world problem domain. Entities. Information models operate on so-called entities and entity relationships. In this section, we will clarify what an entity is. An entity is a particular object in the problem domain. For example, we can extend the electronics organization above to identify three distinct entities: products, customers, and sales representatives. They are distinct from one another in the sense that each has characteristics, properties, or attributes that distinguish it from the others. Thus, a product has properties such as type, function, dimensions, weight, brand name, cost, and price. A customer has properties such as name, city of residence, age, credit rating, and so on. And a sales representative has properties such as name, address, sales region, basic salary, and so on. Each entity is thus modeled in the database as a collection of data items corresponding to its relevant attributes. Note that we distinguish between entities even if in the real world they are from the same class of objects. For example, a customer and a sales representative are both people, but a customer is a person who purchases goods, while a sales representative is one who sells goods. The different roles play distinguishes each from the other. Note also the point made earlier that an information model captures only what is relevant in the given problem domain. Certainly, there are other entities in the organization: regional offices, warehouses, storekeepers, distributors, and so on, but this may be irrelevant in the context of, say, analyzing sales transactions and are thus omitted from the information model. Even at the level of entity attributes, not all conceivable properties need be captured as data items. A customer's height, weight, hair color, hobby, formal qualification, favorite foods, and so on are probably irrelevant and can thus be omitted from the model. Strictly speaking, the objects we referred to above as entities are perhaps more accurately called entity classes because they each denote a set of objects, individual entities, each of which exhibits the properties or attributes described for the class. Thus, the entity class customer is made up of individual entities, each of which has attributes, name, city of residence, age, and so on. Every individual entity will then have these attributes, but one individual will differ from another in the values, data items, associated with attributes. For example, one customer entity might have the value Smith as its name attribute, while another might have the value Jones. Notice now that in our information model, an attribute is really a pair, an attribute description or name such as age, and an attribute value such as 56, or simply an attribute value pair. An individual entity is completely modeled only when all its attribute descriptions have been associated with appropriate attribute values. The collection of attributes, value pairs that model a particular individual entity is termed a data object. Figure 8.2 below illustrates three data objects in the database, each being a complete model of an individual from its corresponding entity class. See picture for more details. Entity relationship. An entity by itself is often not as interesting as or informative as when it releases in some way to some other entity or entities. A particular product, say a CD-ROM drive, itself only tells us about its intrinsic properties as recorded in its associated data object. A database, however, models more than individual entities in the problem domain. It also models relationships between entities. In the real world, entities do not stand alone. A CD-ROM drive is supplied by a supplier, is stored in a warehouse, is bought by a customer, is sold by a sales representative, is serviced by a technician, and so on. Each of these is an example of a relationship, a logical association between two or more entries. Figure 8.3 above illustrates such relationships by using links labeled with the type of association between entities. In the figure, a representative sells a product and a customer buys a product. Taken together, these links and the entities they link model a sales transaction. A particular sales transaction will have a product data object related through the sales relation to a representative data object and through the buys relation to a customer data object. Like entity attributes, there are many more relationships than are typically captured in an information model. The choices are of course based on judgment of relevance given a problem domain. Once choices are made and the database populated with particular data objects and relationships, it can then be used to analyze the data to support decision making. In the simple example developed so far, there are already many types of analysis that can be carried out. For example, the distribution of sales of a particular product type by sales region, the performance of sales representatives, measured perhaps by total value of sales in some time interval, product preferences by customer, age groups, and so on. Database management. The real world is dynamic. As an organization goes about its business, entities are created, modified, or destroyed. Similarly, with early relationships, it is easier to see even for the simple problem domain above. For example, when a sales is made, the product sold is then logically linked to the customer that bought it and to the representative that sold it. Many sales transactions will take place each day, and thus many new logical links created by many individual entities. New entities can also be introduced. For example, a new customer arrives on the scene, a new product is offered, or a new salesperson is hired. Likewise, some entities may no longer of concern to the organization, may no longer be of concern to the organization. For example, a product is discontinued, a salesperson quits or is fired, and so on. These entities may still exist in the real world, but have become irrelevant for the problem domain. Clearly, an information model must also change to reflect the changes in the problem domain that it models. If the problem domain is small, involving only a few entities and relationships, and the dynamic changes are relatively few or infrequent, manual methods may be sufficient to maintain an accurate record of the state of the business. But if hundreds of thousands of entities are involved and the business is very dynamic, then maintaining accurate record states becomes more of a problem. This is when computers with their immense power to handle large amounts of information become crucial to an organization. Frequently, it is not just a question of efficiency, but of survival, especially in intensely competitive business sectors. The need to use computers to efficiently and effectively store databases and to keep them current has developed over the years special software packages called Database Management Systems (DBMS). A DBMS enables users to create, modify, access, and protect their databases. In other words, a DBMS is a tool to be applied by users to build an accurate and useful information model of their enterprise. Conceptually, database management is based on the idea of separating a database structure from its contents. Quite simply, a database structure is a collection of static descriptions of entity classes and relationships between them. At this point, it is perhaps simplest to think of an entity class description as a collection of attribute labels. Entity content can then be thought of as the values that get associated with attribute labels, creating data objects. In other words, the distinction between structure and content is little more than the distinction made earlier between attribute label and attribute value. Relationship descriptions, likewise, are simply labeled links between entity descriptions. They specify possible links between data objects. That is, two data objects can be linked only if the database structure describes a link between their representative entity classes. Figure 8.5 illustrates this separation of structure from content. The database structure is also called a schema or meta-structure because it describes the structure of data objects. It predefines all possible states of a database in the sense that no state of database can contain a data object that is not the result of instantiating an entity schema. And likewise, no state can contain a link between two data objects unless such a link was defined in the schema. Moreover, data manipulation procedures can be separated from data as well. Thus, the architecture of database systems may be portrayed. Figure 8.6 Architecture of database systems. Database languages. We see from the foregoing that to build a database, a user must define the database schema, apply a collection of operators supported by the DBMS to create, store, retrieve, and modify data of interest. A typical DBMS would provide tools to facilitate the above task. At the heart of these tools, a DBMS typically maintains two close related languages: a data description language (DDL), which is used to define database schema, a data manipulation language (DML), which allows the user to manipulate data objects and relationships between them in the context of given database schemas. These languages may vary from one DBMS to another in their underlying model, data model, complexity, functionality, and ease of use, user interface. So far, we have talked about users as if they were all equal in interacting with a DBMS. In actual fact, there may be several types of users distinguished by their role, a division of labor, often necessary because of highly technical aspects of DBMS. For example, an organization that uses a DBMS will normally have a database administrator whose job is to create and maintain a consistent set of database schemas to satisfy the needs of the different parts of the organization. The DBA is the principal user of the DDL. Then there are application developers who develop specific functions around the product inventory, customer information, point of sale transaction handling, and so on. They are the principal users of the DML. And finally, there are the end users who use the applications developed to support their work in the organization. They normally don't see and don't care to know about the DDL or the DML. The DDL is a collection of statements for the description of data types, the DBA must define the target database structure in terms of these data types. For instance, the data object attributes and link mentioned above are data types and hence may be perceived as a simple DDL. Thus, the data structures in Figure 8.7 below are notionally DDL descriptions of a database schema. Notional because the actual language will have specific syntactical constructs that may differ from one DBMS to another. A DML is a collection of operators that can be applied to valid instances, that is, data objects of the data types in the schema. The DML is used to manipulate instances, including the creation, modification, and retrieval of instances. Like the DDL above, the illustration here is notional. More concrete forms of these languages will be covered in later sections of this book. Summary. In this lesson, you have learned that databases are used to store persistent data, that database management is based on the state of separating a database structure from its contents, that the database language is divided into data and data description language (DDL) and data manipulation language (DML), that a DBMS is a tool to be applied by users to build an accurate and useful information model of their enterprise, that the information model is made up of entities and their relationships. End of study session 8. Thanks for listening.